Welcome to Tech Talks by AdTech. We wish you a very, very happy 2021, and I know all of us have been looking forward to this year. We're here today, right at the beginning of 2021, to talk about marketing, technology, and business trends and priorities for this year, with none other than Terry Kawaja, who's the founder and CEO of Luma Partners. Luma Partners is a strategic advisory firm focused at the intersection of media, marketing, and technology. Terry is a seasoned investment banker with more than 25 years of experience, and he has advised over $300 billion worth of transactions, including some of the most pivotal deals in media and tech industries. Welcome, Terry. Great to have you on Tech Talks today. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Sure.
So Terry, let me start off with the first and the most obvious question. I have been reading Digital Trend, the State of Digital Media 2019, and it started with saying change and more change. And I cannot even begin to describe 2020 in that context. What has this year really taught us, and what can we look forward to in 2021? And I'll end with the same question as well.
Yeah. Well, our industry, fortunate or otherwise, the one permanency about it is this notion of change, right? I mean, the media and marketing industries have seen, new channels emerge, the primacy of data and the ability to, deliver your message to a specific audience, lots of different software and analytics technologies that assist with the more precision messaging. And let's face it, everything from, virality to engagement, we've sort of learned how to do it better, if you will. And as a concept, and let's not forget government, regulation and technology changes have just thrown the industry in this sector into a torrent of change, and that was before the pandemic. So I think what the net effects of the pandemic were multifold. Obviously it was a big shock, and it still is. I don't want to suggest that we are through with this. The infection rates and death rates are still horrific, and but there's obviously, with the vaccines, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully we learn from this. But the effects beyond the first quarter, which were one of sort of shock, where a lot of folks either ceased spending money on ad and marketing campaigns. In our world, the deal making basically came to a screeching halt as everyone put sort of future oriented considerations on pause, for the obvious reason that we had no idea where the world was going in Q2. We are fortunate that it appears to have been temporary, and we largely have seen a V-shaped recovery. Obviously, there are some sectors that are exceptions to that, travel and hospitality and others that will take longer, real estate to come back, but hopefully they will all be back again. And certain sectors, in fact, got an accelerant out of this. We define a group of, we're calling the Pandemic Trifecta. So it's streaming, gaming, and e-commerce. Each one of those sectors probably accelerated 6 or 7 years in 6 or 7 months. Real acceleration, which for the most part appears to be permanent. So that has produced a lot of activity. I think the other thing that we've all come away from this pandemic with is this notion of resiliency and perseverance. I mean, just on a personal basis, in the lockdown, that was hard. It's hard for us on the go, short attention span human beings that are used to, signals and change and travel and interactions, to have the discipline to stay home, to stay focused on remaining safe and keeping the population safe. So, that's been a challenge. But I think what we also overcame was this notion that we actually can work. I mean, look, some jobs obviously can't, are completely disrupted, but for many of us, we can do this. We can actually function by working from home, whether it's in the, you're selling media, you're buying advertising, or you're negotiating deals. It turns out life does go on, and this notion of resiliency and perseverance have become all that more important. The other thing we've learned, and this came as a real shock to me, was what has happened with the public stock markets. I got this all wrong. I would have thought in April. I'm personally in a lot of cash right now because I just didn't see what transpired in the year 2020 with stock markets up 20, 30, 40%, technology up even higher than that. I did not see that coming. And whilst a vibrant, robust sort of public market valuations is good for a lot of things, funding and deals, it's demonstrated in marketing and advertising technology that there is such thing as escape velocity. For years, this has been a sector where most companies at best can hope for a trade sale in the hundreds of millions. But here we sit in December of 2020 in the midst of a pandemic, and there are 3 ad tech companies that are at least they're either pure play or they derive the majority of their revenues from ad tech that have market capitalizations in excess of $40 billion. Of course, I'm referring to the Trade Desk, Roku, and Unity Software. So Roku is in the CTV realm and Unity Software in the gaming realm, but they're all advertising technology driven businesses and have these phenomenal market capitalizations, which is great for them. But I think more important than just those 3 names, it signals to everyone else that yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. No, yes, it is possible to achieve what I describe as escape velocity, whereby you attract investors that heretofore maybe have not focused in this sector. And I think, the stock valuations of the other ad tech companies have done extremely well. In addition, in part buoyed by this sort of renewed interest of public markets in our sector. And then finally, I guess the other sort of thing that transpired in 2020 was this notion of a pushback, the techlash that we described in our 2019 State of Digital referred to the growing angst that many had with the large tech platforms, and for a variety of reasons, what it's doing to our youth, their interference in things like politics and elections, the divisive nature of how it's creating, separation and division in our societies. There are many ills that are ascribed to the large tech platforms, but amongst the most, at least on a B2B context, is their growing power. And this year and at the tail end of this year, we have now seen legislation here in the U.S. at a federal level and multiple legislative efforts at state levels around antitrust. And that is to call out primarily Google and Facebook, but I suspect Amazon and Apple are not far off from the regulators' ire and attention around practices that could best be described as anti-competitive. Because at the core of it, if we do not have a level, fair playing field and a competitive dynamic, yes, of course, there will always be winners and losers. That's capitalism, but it has to be fair. And I think this attention, while I'm not naive enough to think that, all these companies are going to be completely broken up and will be at a level playing field completely, I do think that the headwinds play well for the open internet and for other players. And in the famous words of Scott Galloway, a breakup or at least regulatory attention of the large tech platforms will serve as a way to oxygenate the market. I think that's a great term because it will literally, imbibe oxygen into the ecosystem, which I think will be healthy and good for everyone. So those are just some of the takeaways that I sort of felt about the year that otherwise was a bit of a disaster, 2020.
The trifecta and oxygenating the market. I love these terms. Thank you, Terry. That's great. And my next question moves on to the same thing about oxygenating the market. So 2020 was a year where tech took off in a big way. There were so many people who were on meeting platforms and content platforms, and so many people, I can speak for India to say that so many people bought groceries online for the first time, and e-commerce was exploding like how. And to me, what that means is more and more of this data is being available for ad targeting. Now, with cookieless browsers and all these, data laws and GDPR, the issue becomes of scale, and all the power, like you said, goes to these 3 or 4 companies who have so much first-party data to boast of. Now, how legitimate is this? We're clearly seeing so many, so much legislation around this already. What are the alternates that are available if a marketer does not want to work with the top 3 or 4? Is there an alternate available? Can they do anything else really?
So I think you're very much right about the premise of your question. I note that we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary. I believe it was February or March of 2011. Mark Andreessen came out with his famous presentation entitled "Software is Eating the World." And his thesis was that we are moving to an era where the advantages of software, and that includes all kinds of capabilities well beyond marketing, beyond our world, but including marketing, will bring a level of operating leverage and scale opportunities to almost every industry, ergo eating the world. And that's what we could look forward to in the decades ahead. Well, here we are 10 years into it. And I would say that in the year 2020, 10 years in, we can now, retrospectively look back and say, boy, did he nail that point, in the sense that, and by the way, prescient, as incredibly prescient, given the penetration of software as a tool to assist, the economy at the time when he said it. It was absolutely nascent, and 10 years later, it is. If you look at a chart, it has grown exponentially. I mean, it is literally the definition of a logarithmic curve, and yet still is a small minority. There is plenty of headroom to go. So the premise of your question is not only spot on, but we're still in early days. So we're, and for those of us for the last 20 years who've been advocates and proponents of the notion that, data and technology is going to change these media and marketing industries, this is really nice to see. 2020 will be looked upon as an inflection point. And yes, it does create all these data signals. Now, of course, we have to do the job of, as Rashad Tabakawala, one of my favorite prognosticators, and a brilliant guy with a fantastic book, check it out on Amazon, is known for saying, is that, data alone, really doesn't help. We need to be intelligent about parsing the data and truly creating a signal from noise. I think that it's one of those things. It's like evolution. Once you know about evolution, you never go back to creationism again. And once you have the data and you can measure, you never go back to basically guessing, which is the way media and advertising operated for decades. This will bring a lot of signals. And of course, when you have the signals, you're going to look at the signals. And I think your secondary premise around this creating an inequity because of the restrictions on third-party data due to privacy related concerns and the primacy of first-party data, which is really only at scale in the hands of a few large platforms, is problematic. I think it's really problematic because no one would argue with the notion that first party data is better, right? I mean, known users with known proclivities, hopefully that are obtained via a consent friendly, privacy friendly manner, has very strong efficacy. No one would doubt the efficacy of first party data. The issue is it's difficult to federate and it's difficult to scale. So, we note that fortunately, we've seen entrepreneurs rally to the cause now that we, are shifting the parameters with the cookies going away and IDFA signals from Apple being deprecated. We need to change the way we do business. And so we've seen technologies appear like clean rooms, to be able to utilize and federate first-party data in a privacy-centric manner. So the good news here is that technology entrepreneurs are rising to the cause, and I believe we'll have solutions that will help us with that conundrum. Nonetheless, I believe it's still going to be a sharp angle. I'm of the view that this notion of privacy and antitrust is a double-edged sword. If you move towards one, privacy, you end up by violating antitrust and vice versa. Now, as it relates to, in terms of oxygenation of the market, in terms of alternative platforms, I mean, it's difficult, it's hard, right? You've got Snap and Twitter are hanging in, and Snap has done a great job in the last year. And we've seen the rise of TikTok. If you take away the ridiculous US political reaction to that, it's a phenomenon, and it is a uniquely different value proposition. And I think that kind of innovation is good. Look, we still have the big three, and I think we're going to have the big three for some period of time, but I am hopeful that we will continue to see more platforms giving more choices to marketers as a function of reaching large masses of people.
Absolutely. I look forward to the alternates, and thank you for mentioning Rishad. Rishad was a keynote at AdTech in 2018, and I was recently, seeing the video of a recording of his keynote, and man, it's almost as if he predicted what 2020 would be like. It was
when people ask me for general advice, I'm like, sure, follow Scott Galloway and follow Rishad Tabakawala. They're very different, but very insightful, interesting perspectives.
Absolutely. Moving on, Terence. So again, in the State of Digital Media 2019, you spoke about the need for holistic marketing solutions, such as Amazon advertising, which are driving consumers through the entire funnel, and the need for multi-touch attribution systems that can essentially show you one view of the consumer across platforms, so that you can work on incrementality metrics. You're not wasting any of your money there. And all this kind of boils down to return on ad spend, which has been, I would say, the single most biggest focus for marketers in 2020, at least the marketers I've been speaking to. How much progress have you seen in this space from a technology perspective? So how well has attribution and a holistic marketing space grown in 2020?
Yeah, so I think we are on this inevitable march along this sort of performance arc. I call sort of e-commerce or business outcomes as advertising perfected, in the sense that if the premise is I spend money on media with the hopes of garnering attention and influencing a consumer who ultimately makes a purchase decision as a consequence of that. Well, if you can just skip straight to the purchase decision, then yes, you sort of perfect your advertising strategies and efforts. I think that the success of the walled gardens demonstrates the efficacy of a closed loop system. So it turns out that if you can measure and record on your platform the impression, the action, the conversion, the delivery, the follow-up, if everything is in a closed loop, like on Facebook, for example, or Amazon for that matter, then you can approach this notion of perfected advertising. You truly solve the Wanamaker issue and know exactly which media, which campaigns, which marketing efforts led to the result. So we know, and all you got to do is look at the market caps of those companies in the trillions of dollars. I'll repeat that, the trillions of dollars. That is prima facie evidence that what we're talking about, data-driven marketing with in a perfected environment, a walled garden with a closed loop on data, works in spades. It's guaranteed. In fact, what it does is it changes the nature of the advertising spend. So in a normal course manner, we would conduct campaigns, take a look at how the campaigns did with the best available data that we had, half of which is guesswork. Did this auto ad, drive lead to a test drive? Well, we didn't exactly know, but we took guesses. So with imperfect data, we would, run campaigns and then look at the data and then adjust our campaigns. Now it's a real-time virtuous circle, and we kind of know the answer. We know what marketing spend and efforts led to the results. And so now the marketers don't view it as a campaign on, campaign off kind of approach. It is always on. Drink from the fire hose. You will, it becomes instead of being a discretionary spend, advertising becomes a cost of goods sold, in which case you will continue to spend so long as it's guaranteed to produce results. And that just changes the fundamental nature of how marketers approach it. I also think we need to step back from this notion of ROAS. In fact, step back from ad spend as the measurement item. And I think it's maybe ROCE, return on consumer experience, to really think broadly about the entire funnel and consumer experience, from the content they see to their interactions with your media format, whether that be in an app or a website or an SMS. We really need to widen our perspective from advertising to the consumer experience. To the specific question you asked around incrementality and MMA, to get away from this last touch attribution nonsense that we've been living with for the last 20 years, sadly, no. I think we've largely gotten nowhere on this. And look, I think the demonstrated efficacy in the perfect environments of the closed loop walled gardens tells us that if we could replicate that for the open web, we'd be really getting somewhere. Sadly, I personally have not, and I've looked at every single company in the space, and they have interesting initiatives and they have excellent theses that they're driving towards with their software applications, but sadly, I haven't seen them at scale, and I hope that this sort of emphasis on antitrust and the wins of the triopoly and the migration to first-party data, and therefore the necessity of federating and scaling that data will help us in achieving that goal. But we really need, and it's beyond MMA, it's really incrementality. I mean, what is actually affecting the outcome is what is necessary. And that's one area I call it it's the kernel, it's the golden, whatever, the linchpin of this whole shooting match of making addressable media accountable in the open web. So I'm hoping that all entrepreneurs out there listen to heed this opportunity. If you can come up with a scalable solution to this problem, then I want to be your personal banker.
Okay, huge opportunity there, Grit. So ROCE, return on customer experience, should be the key for marketer focus on 2021. At least we've run after ROAS in 2020, but 2021 should be about ROCE. And yes, tremendous opportunity for all the marketers out there. Car- Carrying on, Terence, along the same vein. So, uh, what started really as a business model with the Dollar Shave Club and so many others has now really evolved into a marketing strategy. And I'm talking about D2C, a direct to consumer. And we're seeing so many of these legacy brands kind of jumping into this bandwagon, especially in 2020 and in 2021. What are the typical challenges that they should expect to face, and what should this journey ideally be like for a legacy brand that is entering into the D2C space?
So we took early notice of this trend of direct to consumer for a variety of reasons. It was fascinating to see sort of go to market innovations that had the effect of market share gains of relatively young startups taking double digit market shares away from category incumbents who had been building brands for decades. So while normally in marketing, we talk about the success or failure of campaigns by talking about basis point movements in market share, and here was these young companies with a different perspective that were having material impacts and creating a ton of value. So that's what caught our attention. But what's interesting is, whilst that is interesting from a consumer aspect, it actually has tremendous implications from a B2B or an enterprise perspective as well, because essentially what these companies were doing were they were on the front end, the leading edge of the kind of ROAS or ROCE, actually better described, data-driven addressable media strategies that we've just been talking about. They recognize the primacy of first-party data and first-party consumer experiences, and therefore, didn't want to be intermediated by middlemen that were reducing their effectiveness. I also think they had a renewed and improved focus on things like design and customer experience on the front end that represented a material change from many of the legacy companies, and thank God, because we needed change. But it was really the back end, how they look at media spend, really thinking about it on a performance basis. And if you look at these marketers, whether you're talking about sure, there's the goods manufacturers like the razor blades and the makeup companies and what have you, but the Netflixes, the Ubers, the booking.coms of the world are the single most sophisticated marketers as it relates to data-driven strategies. And they understand lifetime customer value to the nickel, and therefore they understand cost of acquisition, and then it just becomes a function of algorithms and math. And I believe that, in 2 years ago, I gave a presentation at the ANA in front of 3,000 marketers with a attention-catching title called Fire Your CMO, with the very premise that, hey, traditional marketers, pay attention to this trend. Learn from what these innovative young companies are doing, again, on the front end and the back end, because A, it's working, and B, you can either read about it in Ad Age and have to post your resume to LinkedIn because you're going to be fired. That got their attention. And I am pleased to say that you're right. We have seen material movement, material innovation on the part of the traditional marketers. I ascribe it, almost entirely to my speech at the ANA. I'm joking. But it is good to see. And they do have challenges of trying to be cool. It's hard to be cool when you're a 70-year-old brand, but we're seeing innovation again on the front end. I think any improvement to customer experience is a benefit, and I think we've seen a more sophisticated approach towards the back end. For example, Procter and Gamble taking control of their data, taking control of their media buying by in-housing, not everything. I mean, they're still going to leverage the best of technologies in the marketplace because that's probably the right strategy. But from a control perspective, from a strategy perspective, they're bringing those items in-house, as are many traditional marketers who have learned that more sophisticated approach is necessary to compete in today's marketplace.
Absolutely. I think there's no running away from the direct to consumer. Consumer's king. You've got to be with them and speaking to them 24/7. So
the ultimate slide in that deck that I presented to these marketers was a man in a suit with his head in the sand, and I, with big words on it, this is not a strategy.
Absolutely. I think that paints the best picture for us. And, time for legacy brands to stand up and start looking at the consumer like they're one with them. So moving on, and let's come back to the trifecta. And I have a question on content for you, Terry. So in 2019, you spoke about OTT and connected TV and addressable TV being at an inflection point. And, honestly, for these people, they couldn't have asked for a better year than 2020. What do you foresee for them in 2021, 2022? Is this sticky? Are they going to do better, worse? What happens?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I think for streaming, both video and audio, because let's face it, we like to the television market and the streaming wars, tends to take up a lot of attention and ink. But let's not forget, podcasting and the growth of audio as a advertising channel. It is the single fastest growing advertising channel. So it's streaming on both video and audio. Gaming is way up, and e-commerce is way.
You can start.
Okay, so question 5, right? Content.
Question 5, content.
From the top. Okay, no worries. Let's go before it breaks down again. Yeah, so I definitely think we have seen an acceleration of something I refer to as the pandemic trifecta: streaming, gaming, and e-commerce. And within streaming, understand that that's both video streaming as well as audio. We've seen a massive explosion in podcasting and other audio advertising as a channel. In fact, it's one of the fastest growing channels. So we've seen these 3 forms of content and conversion channels really accelerate during COVID. These were trends that pre-existed COVID, but they got inflected and accelerated as a function. And I think the reason why it's so important is there are so many large media telco companies with huge market caps for which this switch to streaming from their legacy forms of distribution and their legacy forms of monetization with, windowing content, theatrical windowing and broadcast windowing and syndication windowing and all of the traditional forms of sort of content monetization laddering, to switch to streaming is existential for them, because it's essentially the future of their businesses and the future of their market capitalizations. And we have seen such a rapid turnaround. I mean, we're talking about tried and true monetization and business models that have been around for 75 years having to change in like 24 months. So you saw it with changing approaches and attitudes and reorganizations amongst these large companies, notably Disney and Warner, where just this year, and I think accelerated by the pandemic, they changed the nature of their content distribution and monetization by canceling their theatrical exhibitions and going straight to consumer, straight to streaming. And that, of course, has, anytime you accelerate change like that, there is massive consternation and conflict because, you've got that sort of innovation breeds sort of destructive forces as things change in a rapid manner. Creative destruction, I think, is the line I was looking for. And the analogy I use is it's like a relay race, and you've got two runners, and one has to pass the baton of content monetization to the streaming runner. So you've got the legacy, traditional form of content monetization. They have to hand the baton to the streaming runner. If they don't hand the baton, you can't win the race, because it's a relay race, as it turns out. In the second half, the race can only be run with the streaming capability. And you also don't want to drop the baton while you go from the old world to the new world. One other consequence of this migration to streaming is that in the early days, the early adopters, if you will, or the wealthier demographics and more sophisticated demographics, and they have tended to consume across platforms that are monetized via SVOD, or subscription video on demand. Obviously, for the middle class and for the rank and file of whether it's America or India, for that matter, that will simply not scale, not work. Not everyone has enough wallet to spend on all of these various subscription services. And given the fragmentation, it's impossible to sort of recreate that sort of cable bundle. And so we will have seen, and we will continue to see, a rise of advertising supported video on demand, or AVOD, which will grow. Now, it won't quite be the same. There'll be fewer ad slots, less inventory, because we're used to an SVOD world where there's a lighter ad load, again focusing on that consumer experience. But because that will have the kind of digital-like targetability, we should be able to charge. We should be more relevant. We'll be able to charge a higher premium. So higher RPMs, fewer inventory slots.
Absolutely. And are we also going to see a kind of reversal of trends? So while CTV and OTT is making so much money from the influx of advertisers and the influx of consumers, will they also become the biggest advertisers, trying to curtail any churn that happens within this? Once we go back to office, we're not seeing so much of Netflix anymore.
Yes, I think we can fully expect that all of those firms, again, these are existential migrations for their part, so they cannot afford to lose. And you will see marketing dollars, the likes of which we've never seen before, as they vie for consumer attention in what will be what is old is new again, in the sense that we will see more fragmentation now in a streaming context. And of course, that'll require reaggregation. By the way, all of this is always good for deal makers, right? Because you get these moments of aggregation and then disaggregation, reaggregation, disaggregation. We make money coming or going, so we're fine.
And more content for us.
And more content.
So, keeping on the note of content and scale, AI has been working on, right brain capabilities like ad copy and content curation, content search. So what has been the progress here? And why I specifically asked this question, Terry, is because, like you said, content consumption has exploded. But with social restrictions in place, content production at that scale is a huge challenge. What can AI really do, or artificial intelligence really do for us here?
Yeah, so I think there's great promise to the notion of artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's part of Mark Andreessen's software is eating the world construct. And yes, it's easy to see the left brain applications around analytics and data, et cetera. But yeah, we're encouraged by the sort of early returns on AI's application to the right brain activities of actually, content creation and automation. And I think there's tremendous promise there. I think it's early days and we're going to see a lot more of that application. One caveat though is that I always tell people there's great potential, but be wary of any company that calls themselves an AI company. Because in my parlance, or the way we think about it, AI should be what is powering, your capability otherwise. So think of it, remember those Intel ads, Intel Inside, where they were saying, oh yeah, you have this lovely computer, it does amazing things, but it turns out it's our chips on the inside that's powering it. That's the way we should think of AI. It's AI inside, and be wary of people labeling themselves AI, because that sounds to me like marketing.
Absolutely. In fact, even from the edutech domain, I see so many people telling you, we can teach you AI. And I'm like, how does that happen? So, on the same lines, Terry, you spoke about ROCE, that is return on customer experience. So, what's your verdict for AR, augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality? We've seen so much of the experiential economy take off. What do you say about this?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot to talk about trends, and I actually gave a presentation recently to the World Federation of Advertisers where I focused on just that parsing, the forest for the trees, I think was the title of that presentation, and where I took a look at emerging trends and sort of almost did like a judgment of whether marketers should pay attention to them. With respect to AR and VR, I'm somewhat of a contrarian. I think they're two very different answers. I think for VR is a very narrow applications. It's largely gaming and entertainment. And so I just don't believe the world is going to be walking around with headsets, and think it's narrow applications without a tremendous amount of opportunity for marketers. So I would largely ignore that if I was a marketer. AR, I think, is different. I think there is tremendous long-term potential for AR in a whole variety of ways, mostly, layering of data on top of, content that we're otherwise consuming. But again, I believe people make mistakes by paying attention to things that are too long dated in terms of when they're going to be materially relevant. And I'm advising marketers to ignore it for now. I mean, yes, I think it's going to be awesome someday, but if you're spending heavily in that bleeding edge category today, I'd be worried. So pay it, make a note of it. It's absolutely coming, but not yet, is what I would say.
So the verdict for AR and VR remains the same as in 2019. Okay.
Correct.
So moving on. So we saw the entry of private equity firms. So coming more to the investment side of things, private equity firms moving more into the strategic investments in the MarTech space. And you said, there is this definite move from the financial soundness to strategy or strategic investments coming into play.
Yep.
How successful have these been? Has this paid off really?
Yeah, we've seen a very significant pickup in private equity interest in the category, in the sector. And I think that is a function of a couple of things. Primarily, it's the fact that the gestation of where we are as a stage has meant that we now have scaled, profitable, companies, the likes of which private equity likes to target. So in part, it's this maturation of where we are as a sector that has brought our enough of our companies to a stage that now beyond venture capital and now makes sense for private equity. I think the robust stock market valuations that we spoke of earlier is certainly a contributor, but we have seen a subgroup of private equity that really, you'd have to think of them almost as a hybrid, in the sense that they have taken on, industry advisors that are very sophisticated and deeply knowledgeable about the industry, so much so that they really look at a lot of these deals more from a hybrid sort of strategic financial lens. Anytime you've got a private equity company buying an asset in a competitive auction for 8 times revenue, as we have seen, then you know that this isn't the standard PE, 8 to 12 times EBITDA kind of formulaic approach. They truly are underwriting these investment decisions with the premise that they're going to be able to sort of affect that they see the organic opportunity, the industrial logic of both the investment, and that there is room for an even higher valuation upon a strategic exit. And we've seen companies like Vista and Blackstone and KKR as examples of really stepping up at valuations that just make them not look like the standard sort of private equity deal. And look, the more buyers, the merrier. So we welcome the competition, and I think they could do a great job helping these companies scale and ultimately get to either another trade sale or an IPO.
Absolutely fantastic. So on similar lines, Terry, mergers and acquisitions, and we saw MarTech kind of ruling the roost in the last few years. What are your predictions for the industry going forward? What are the likely scenarios that can play out in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yes, we've seen a tremendous amount of activity in MarTech, enumerating in tens of billions of dollars of transactions, and at quite heady volumes, which is encouraging. And it's a culmination, I think, of many of the trends we talked about previously. The software is eating the world, the addressability of media, the accountability and perfection of the sort of data-driven marketing, all the operating leverage that these models bring to the table, and really just the growing TAM, if you will, total addressable market of these businesses, which is what is attracting both the strategics and the financial investors. In 2020, we really saw a barbell sort of shaped M&A activity. The year got off to a fantastic start in Q1, went on complete pause in Q2, trickled back in Q3, although dialogue had started to pick up, and then came back in a torrent in Q4. And we have an amazing pipeline of deals leading well into the first half of 2021. Deal making tends to be tied to change. So I've often described myself as a banker to change. To the extent that there's change, that means you need to have strategies that address that change. Strategies come in 2 forms: organic and inorganic. Organic means you do on your own. Inorganic means M&A. And when the rate of change accelerates, that causes companies to default to inorganic strategies. Why? Time to market. There's no time to build a product to respond to a rapid change in the marketplace. So change drives M&A, and accelerated change drives a ton of M&A. So we are buckling up for an extremely busy 2021 as we continue to see change deriving from regulation, whether that be privacy or antitrust, large technology changes like we've seen in identity, accelerations of things like streaming and audio and e-commerce and gaming. I mean, all of these things are and in an environment where we have a vibrant, robust stock market valuation, hordes of cash on the balance sheets of these companies, 0% interest rate, so you could borrow to your heart's content for virtually nothing. And now I can finally say, and now going forward, a stable government in the United States. So I think all of those set up. We'll go back to your original question of what you think about 2021. I am of the view that we are about to see a phenomenal year. Of course, we still have to get over this COVID, which is, terrible and will weigh on us for some period of time. So I think we got to stay disciplined around the social distancing and the mask wearing, and the vaccines are proving to be a lot of source of optimism. But we have a stable government. Ad spend is rebounded, right? Complete V-shaped recovery. Permanent gains in streaming and e-commerce, new channel growth, like with podcasting, changes in identity, as I mentioned, triopoly headwinds, which will hopefully oxygenate the market. We've got new entrants, private equity, credit bureaus, looking at the space. As I mentioned, cheap capital, almost 0% interest rates, robust equity valuations with the S&P PE over 37, I think it's currently at, and we've seen this sort of widening gap between innovators and legacy companies in terms of valuations. All of that should breed for an acceleration of innovation and an acceleration of deal making in 2021 and beyond. So, Shalini, we are as optimistic as we've ever been. We have rarely seen conditions set up this well for prolific and robust deal making and growth for the media and marketing world. So I gotta say, I'm a natural optimist, but I'm particularly optimistic about the year ahead.
That's really, really wonderful to hear, because we really look forward to 2021. So you've told us all these all the points and all the data pieces and all the intelligence for 2021. What are you really feeling for 2021?
I'm having trouble sleeping because I'm so excited. I'm serious. There is so much opportunity, and it's going to require a lot of work, and I'm ready, willing, and able to do it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Terry. This was such an eye-opening and wonderful conversation.